Sorry, yes, we can see
Okay,
it.
great. I just want to double check. I'm also turning my captions on. And for people who don't really know about the captions with Google Slides, they're pretty accurate, but just so you know, it might be a little funky in instances. So I do apologize if it's not 100%. But as Joe mentioned, welcome to Atten's Lunch Hour live from DrupalCon. Today, we're going to be diving into the world of digital accessibility, and you will learn some of the basics to performing your own accessibility review. As Joe mentioned, my name is Michaela Blackham, and I'm the Accessibility and QA Specialist at Atten Design Group. As a little bit of background, I entered into the workforce as an interactive designer, then I became a combo designer and developer before I moved into the development world full-time. I've been really advocating and really pushing for this passion on digital accessibility for about 5 to 6 years now. And as of 2020, I moved into a full accessibility specialist role here at Atten to really make a difference in our process, build a partnership with the Blind Institute of Technology, and educate others on the importance of creating accessible products and services. But I've always been asked on how I got involved with this so early and why it's so important to me. I grew up with a cousin my age with Duchenne muscular dystrophy and watched how she was able to do her homework, navigate the internet, or even just listen to music on her iPod, all with little to no mobility and difficulty speaking loud enough for talk-to-type programs like Dragon or Siri. Sometimes she had to get very creative, but most of the time she had to ask for help, which I know frustrated her immensely. And so I always wanted to relieve her of that stress. So I slowly got involved with both physical and digital accessibility. But really, focusing on accessibility of your site is important in order to relieve the stress of everyone using your site, not just for people who may struggle with it a bit more, like M. So anyways, that's why we're here today. We'll be going over how to perform your own accessibility review. You may not leave here a full expert, but you will at least leave this presentation with a basic understanding of how to catch some of the more common errors that we tend to find. But before we jumped into that, I definitely wanted to jump into this portion first, because it's usually the first question that I get when I do a workshop or a presentation related to this. So what about those accessibility plugins and overlays? Why do I need to learn how to do a full accessibility review when I can just buy this overlay? So before we really dive in, I want to go over that briefly. If you're unfamiliar with these widgets and overlays, it would be something like this. So here we have the Atten website, and you can see there's the arrow pointing to that little icon in the bottom right-hand corner. When you click this icon, it actually, this pop-up appears, and there's so many options to choose from. You don't even see all of them here. So you can actually highlight the titles, highlight the links, minimize, make it larger, change the alignment. You can turn on keyboard navigation or turn on screen reader navigation. But this gives you more options than any person will ever need to adjust their website to best fit their needs. It doesn't require anyone going into your code though, because you only have to paste one line of JavaScript into your code and it will automatically fix everything using artificial intelligence. And it sounds pretty amazing, but I feel like we've all learned in the past the hard way that if it sounds too good to be true, then it probably is. I know it has the right intentions, and obviously everyone's just trying to make sure that their site is accessible, and obviously for legal issues as well. But implementing a process, getting a review, and implementing changes to improve your site can happen just a little bit at a time. Don't fall for these get accessible quick schemes. This is something we can go into a lot of detail about, and we did go into it a little bit on Tuesday with Mike, but we'll leave a lot of that information for another time, but I'll go over just kind of the basics of why they're not that great. There are a number of issues. For instance, a majority of the guidelines in WCAG cannot be fixed or detected with automated tools alone. Human logic must always be applied. Screen reader users will use their proprietary software, always. They will never, ever use that screen reader option on there. So really, it's just kind of a gimmicky thing to have there. You need to customize your experience before you can even interact with the site. Instead of just having an accessible site where someone can just jump right in and get the content they need, they now need to go to this overlay and make it work for them before they can even jump in to get the content. Most people won't actually go through that. And there's not just one plugin out there, there's multiples, and every plugin is different and therefore includes a new learning curve. Imagine going to one website and you got it set up perfectly for yourself, and then you go to another website and another overlay appears, and now you have to go through and set those ones up as well. And unfortunately, it actually takes focus away from screen readers if it's the first thing on the page. It will actually ping them over and over again to use this option when in reality, they may not actually need it for that page. And there are a ton of options and customizations. And sometimes when there's just too many options, it can be extremely overwhelming. And it's kind of costly for a monthly subscription. So it may only be $50, maybe $100 for now, but over time, over 2 years, that's going to add up. And it would actually be less to just do a true revamp. And what happens if an update happens and it no longer works on your site? Then your site is no longer accessible. And honestly, like I said, we're partnered with the Blind Institute of Technology for screen reader testing here at Atten. And we have had lengthy discussions with their team. My favorite quote from all of this was from an actual screen reader user, is that website overlays hijack the user experience, attempting to display the site in a way it thinks is helpful to me. Many overlays sit at the top of the page and continuously send audio announcements to the screen reader, asking the user to engage the tool. These alerts constantly interrupt the audio when the web page is being read. This is from Mike Hess, founder, executive director of Blind Institute of Technology. If you were at my presentation on Tuesday, then you definitely met him there and he had some thoughts about that. So as you can see, it's actually creating more harm than good. It may deter some lawyers from now, but it doesn't actually change the structure of your site. If the code actually isn't changed, then your site is still fairly inaccessible and unusable. And as we can see from Mike here, overlays trick product teams into thinking accessibility can be solved and put into out of mind with just a few clicks. There is absolutely no substitute for making a digital accessibility an embedded part of your team culture. And that is why we're here today. So let's dive in and let's talk about some of the steps we can take to make your site more accessible. So first things first, we're gonna set up our site. We're going to do the steps to set up our site correctly. Now, this isn't completely foolproof. You aren't going to leave a true accessibility expert. However, these include some extremely basic steps and absolutely anyone can take to make improvements on their site. A reminder that full VPATs and accessibility reports should be done by a true expert in the field, but taking these steps prior to the review could save your organization time and money in the process. So let's set it up for our review. The first thing we'd want to do is gather a list of all the pages that we're going to take a look at. All of these pages that I'm going to recommend may not be relevant to you, but at least working from this list will be super, super helpful. So first, I like to dive in and get the 10 most visited pages based on Google Analytics from the past year. Sometimes you may have to go to 11, 12, or something of that sort because, for instance, homepage will most likely be on that top 10, and you don't need to include that twice. So what I would do is I would then go to the top 11 and then keep going down until it makes sense. Homepages are the most visited page probably on your website, so you definitely want to include that. We also want to include a login page if that's necessary. If your content is mostly behind a login, you need to make sure people can actually access that information. You want to take all the main landing pages from your main navigation. This could be like the About Us page or our careers or anything of that sort. You also want to make sure you grab a few pages with forms if you have it. These are very interactive elements, so you want to make sure that keyboard users, screen reader users, and everybody else can actually interact and send that form. If you have tables on your site, you definitely want to take a look at any page that may have a table. And a reminder that only tabular data should actually be in the tables. You should not be using it for structure. And you want to take a look at anything that has infographics and images, as well as various types of charts and graphs. You want to make sure your alternative text is correct, that you're describing these charts and graphs correctly, and that you're not using color alone to dictate exactly what that content is. And more importantly, you need to focus on all major interactive elements on your site. If you have a page with accordion FAQs, you need to include that. If you have a carousel, you need to include that. If you have drop downs, interactive forms, an interactive map, any of those items, you need to include those because we want to make sure everyone can access that information. So here's a quick example of one that we've done in the past. I've changed some of the text and I obviously didn't include the URLs, but you can see we have a column for the name of the page. We've included the content type so that we can jump in and say, okay, this came from Google Analytics. This came from the landing page from the main nav. We also have a column that it explains, okay, this is content, this is a list, this is a table, this is a form, so that we have an idea of what we're testing. And I also like to include on this entire overview page is a Lighthouse score, just so we have something to work from, errors, contrast alerts, as well as any notes that are necessary. So I like to create this Google Doc and have this overview page so we have something to work from. So after we have all those pages, we need to set everything up to record all of our findings. Again, you can just use a Google Sheet to accomplish this. You don't have to get too fancy. But when you're using this Google Sheet, we need to make sure we have columns that include the URL that we're working from, if it's an error or a warning, the WCAG issue at hand. And if you honestly don't know the WCAG issues, a lot of times, if it just doesn't seem right to you, it's probably an issue on there. The location of the issue. So yes, we have the URL on the page, but we need to make sure that we know exactly where in that content this issue is, because if we send this content, this backlog of errors to maybe another developer, we want them to be able to jump in real quick and make those changes. We need to include any kind of major details on that issue. For instance, maybe the low contrast is so close to passing, so you need to include that in there just so they know that they don't have to make that big of a difference. This one's important, the who needs to fix it. A lot of times, a lot of the errors actually come from content editors, but it could be a designer or a developer. So if you can put it in there, that would be super helpful. And if you know the solution to the issue at hand, you can definitely include that. So then the person that you're giving this to can jump in and make that change right away. As well as the type of test. So this is interesting because this is like, is it an automated test that you found it? Did you use a keyboard to find it? Did you just visually look at the page and it didn't look right? If you can include that, then someone can know how to appropriately QA that information. Looking quickly here, you can see I have the column for a page name. Sometimes it's site-wide, so you can see the site-wide elements at the top. You can see there's a keyboard issue, there's screen reader issues, there's visual issues. All of these are errors in this instance, but you can keep going forward. You can imagine that if it's a warning, it's probably yellow. We have WCAG issue listed, whether it's interaction, contrast, focus style, a little bit of detail, a little bit of notes if needed, the team member who's responsible, as well as the solution. So now that we've set everything up, we can now jump into actual testing and review your site. First, I like to run automated tests on all the pages from your list. When I talk about automated testing, I talk about these tools that comb through the code to find the nitty-gritty issues. A lot of these issues are things that would be difficult to find without actually going through the code or looking at the front end of the site. These are issues like insufficient contrast, incorrect heading structure, vague links, missing form labels, and so on. These are things you would only find if you do look at the code itself. Keep in mind that some of these results from your automated testing can actually give false errors. And that's because, yes, this does some automated testing, but human logic, as I mentioned, will always need to be applied. Common false errors I see are related to contrast, and it's always good to take another look when you manually check your site. And just remember that automated testing isn't a catch-all. The manual testing is always necessary, but it's definitely the first step in the review process. So the two I would recommend for absolute beginners without having to worry about diving into code or setting up some automated testing on that side, and it's free, would be Wave and Lighthouse. There are a number of automated tools you can integrate with your everyday CLI, like I mentioned, like Pally or Koali or Axe and so on. But for today's session, we're focusing on these easy to use and free tools that anyone can use. So Wave has a website, wave.webaim.org, as well as an extension that you can add to Chrome or Firefox. The good thing about the extension is that if you have something behind a login, you can still use the Wave tool using the extension rather than the website itself. It gives a fairly clean overview of what errors and warnings are found in the code. I always recommend this one for people starting out because the site in general is a great resource for learning WCAG standards, as well as the basic ADA compliance. And the information along with the errors is actually a bit more human readable than some of the other free review sites out there. So let's take a look at this in action and see what we can do. I've already recorded it, so I'll just kind of dive in. We're going to take a look at the Apple website. So here we are at wave.webaim.org. There's links off of here for the extension. We're going to put in the Apple website here. Once we have that going, you can see it reloads and we have a bunch of things going on here. So let's scroll down. It's kind of a little overwhelming. So what we're going to do is go over to the left-hand column here, and you can see we have like details of what's going on, including structural elements, for example. So we're going to go down here. We're actually going to turn off the features, the structural elements, as well as ARIA, because for this instance, we really only need to pay attention to warnings and errors. The good thing here is you can actually click the information next to each error, and then here you can see it gives a little bit more information on how to fix it. You also have this code option down below that when you click on the error over here, it will jump straight to where the error actually is. You also have the ability to click on the icons on the website itself just to see exactly what's going on. Sometimes that could be a little bit easier. From here, there's other tabs. So we're going to look at the structure tab, for example, and here you can see it kind of just gives you all the elements on the page, all the headings, if things are lists or anything of that sort. It's kind of nice to see if you're skipping headings and such. And here is the contrast. So you can see you can click on the various ones and it's going to highlight exactly what's wrong. You can also see that their colors are integrated there for foreground and background. And in this instance, it passes for large text, but not normal text. So let's change that slightly and make it a little darker. And now you have the hex code to make that that contrast actually work. Sorry about that. You can also turn the styles off on the site. And this is a great way to catch if you have paragraphs that you're bolding instead of headings. You can also see if a list is being used correctly, if maybe it's actually in a table and it shouldn't be. So it's a great way to view the site as a screen reader may view the site. Lighthouse is another option here, and it's found on Chrome in the Dev Tools. I recommend using Wave with Lighthouse. I wouldn't usually use Lighthouse all by itself. They have a slightly different algorithm than most others because obviously Google is trying to use it to weigh their search results. It also does more than accessibility, which is nice because it does some performance, some best practices, and SEO. It's nice to have because it gives your site a score, which supposedly helps weigh Google search results. Obviously, a higher score means that you have a better search result, but also that you're higher on accessibility side and you have less errors. Ideally, you want a score of at least 90. So let's take a look at this in action on the Apple site. So you can see here, we're back on the Apple site. And what we're going to end up doing is we're going to end up opening the developer inspector tools here. So you can right click and go to inspect. You can see we're in the code and there's a couple different tab options up there, including Lighthouse. When we get here, you can see those categories I mentioned, like performance, best practices, SEO. You also can choose between mobile and desktop. I have mine set up as I want it already. So we're going to generate the report. And here you can see it refreshes the page. You might see a tablet view quickly. And you can see we have an 84 for a score, which isn't too bad. You'll go through here. It will list all the errors that you have. You can expand and get more information. You can also expand the error and actually click on the more details. And it'll take you straight to that area in the code so you can pinpoint exactly where to fix it. But as I mentioned before, automated testing only does so much. And it even lists the additional items you need to manually check. So even though you have this information, it still will recommend exactly what you should do for manual check. But again, you'll have this score of 84 that you can start with. And then hopefully once you're done with your accessibility side, you will have a much higher score than that. So next we're going to talk about interacting with your site using just your keyboard. A number of users are visual users who may not be able to use a mouse. Or you could be like me. I'm a normal everyday user, but I just find it quicker to do a lot more keyboard commands rather than use the mouse. Because of that, anyone can actually test their site using keyboard only and use that instead of your mouse to get where they need to go. The good thing is if your keyboard can interact with the element, then a screen reader user can most likely interact with it as well. But if you can't interact with it, then a screen reader also cannot. Making sure your site works with a keyboard is a major step. Just to note that some browsers actually require you to turn this option on. I know Safari is one of those, it's not default. So if you are tabbing into your website and you find that it's actually not working, you may have to go to your preferences and turn that on. So let's jump right in. When we're talking about navigating with the keyboard, these are the only keys you really need to worry about. So you have the escape key, the tab, the shift, space bar, enter, and arrow keys. Tab is going to probably be your best friend. This basically jumps to forwards from the very beginning to the very end to every single item on the page that is interactive. So that could be a link, it could be a menu item, it could be a button, it could be a carousel, anything of that sort. If you are expecting to hit something that's interactive and you're not, that will be obviously an issue that would pop up. But let's say you maybe went a little too far tabbing and now you have to go backwards. By hitting Shift and Tab at the same time, you will then go backwards. Escape is a very important one. So this will close a lot of pop-ups that are there. So this could be maybe a drop-down, a modal window, a pop-up, a video. Basically anything that has a close button or something that you would have to click off of to close, it should work as well by using the escape key. Arrow keys are also very important. You use this a lot with radios, checkboxes, selects, and carousels. So usually if you're tabbing through something and you're like, oh, I can't mark this piece as true or false with the radio button, you probably just use the up and down arrow key and you should be able to get to where you need to. And then finally, the space and enter keys. So enter is kind of the default for all the buttons and links and all of that sort. However, spacebar can be used for some buttons as well as radios, checkboxes, and selects. So that was pretty much it. Those are all the keys that you'll really need to worry about. Now, what do you have to look for? The first thing you want to check is that if you can even interact with your site at all. Are you trying to interact with something, but your keyboard just isn't getting there? Like you want to make sure that everything that you can use your mouse with, you can access via your keyboard. You also want to double check to see if your interaction is expected. Did you click on this link and then you expected to go to a new page, but a pop-up happened? Did you expect to maybe go to the main content, but all of a sudden you're in a sidebar? Just pay attention to like, okay, this is what I expected to happen, and this isn't what is happening. You want to check your focus styles. It's very difficult to tab through an entire site if you have no indication of where you are. I'll go over this one in the next one, in my next example, so that you'll kind of know what's going on the next slide. You want to make sure that you interact with all skip links. And usually you probably don't even know if these exist unless you use your keyboard. So this usually is the first thing on the page where you can skip your main navigation and jump straight to the main content. I also see this a lot with maybe skipping over videos or maybe a list of events in embedded Twitter feeds. You just have to make sure that when you click on that skip link, your next tab is actually where you want to be. So if you're expecting to be in the main content, but you're still in the main nav, that could be an issue. You want to interact with every single mobile, pop-up, carousel, or anything interactive. You want to make sure that all of that is working as you expect. You want to pay attention to logical order. We read up and down and left to right. So that's really what the logical order should be. So if you're tabbing through and you jump to the right sidebar instead of going to the main content, that could be an issue if someone's expecting to be right into the main content. You also want to go forwards and backwards. You want to make sure that if you hover over maybe an image and then some teaser text appears, you need to make sure that that also works when you gain focus on it when you tab to it. Otherwise, a hover should not be displaying more information. And don't forget to check your mobile menu. I know we're always on desktop when we're doing a lot of these tests, but those same interactions apply on your phone as well. Screen readers are still on your phone. So you need to make sure that you can access the mobile menu or any of those types of things on your phone as well. So I'm going to go through a quick little interaction here with the keyboard on the Apple site again. So you can see here, I'm going to jump into the main browser area. You see that little blue box that appears, that's the focus style. You want to keep it the default if you can to go through, but you can see I have to go through all these options before I can even buy an iPad Air. So we're missing that skip link. So let's go back a little bit and then let's interact with the search because I know that's a pop-up. And in this instance, I can hit escape and close it on my actual computer, but because I'm in the screencast, it's not working. So you see I had to go to the close button. So we're kind of navigating through, I know where I am. But all of a sudden I just noticed that's a link, but it didn't look like a link. So that's kind of an issue. Like, shouldn't that actually look like a link? So now that we've kind of gone through the logical order there, everything seems to be fine. Let's make it a little bit smaller. And then until we see the Hamburg menu appear on the top left. So here we are. So now we're going to tab through again. You can see we're in this little carousel, but I'm trying to reach that arrow, but I'm not quite reaching it. So then I used my arrow keys and those actually worked, but it was a little confusing to see the arrow and not be able to reach it. So then let's go see and check the menu, which we can gain focus and we can access, and I even tabbed into it. And again, I can hit escape and it closes, but because it's the screencast, it's defaulting to something else. So I have to go back to the close button. So it's like just a quick overview of what you would be expecting to do with your keyboard focus. And you would just kind of be navigating through back and forth until you feel comfortable that your site is working or that you've caught all the issues at hand. So now that we've done the automated testing and your keyboard review, let's just look at the site. Let's manually review everything that we have. This is where you may confirm any false errors or check any structural errors and so on. This is where you're going to apply some human logic and flag anything that doesn't seem quite right. So first we want to manually review the page and check at various screen sizes. Like I said, we checked on desktop, but we also made it smaller till we had a mobile. You want to rerun those automated tests to make sure that anything that may not be shown on desktop is actually compliant in mobile as well. You want to make sure you zoom in on your site by up to at least 200%. And this is an actual WCAG guideline. You want to make sure that someone who's blind visually impaired may be able to, maybe someone needs to zoom in to be able to see it. It should all flow correctly and size of the text should flow and get larger and actually work as expected. You also want to check for false contrast errors. For example, this one is popping up on the automated test, but if you were, and that's because it's the white text over the blue background, but that blue background is an image, so it can't actually dictate if it's an error or not. So you would go in here and you would maybe grab an eyedropper and make sure you get the right blue and get the white and double check that, and it should work. And that's when you go, okay, well, that's actually a false error, so we can move on from there. You want to make sure that color isn't the only means of distinction. So what I mean by that is I see it a lot with graphs, for instance. So you can see here we have red, orange, green, and blue. And you have to go over to the key to realize that, okay, red means daily, orange means twice a week. But if you're colorblind, you may not be able to actually associate the orange with the orange in the graph. So you need to make sure that either there's a pattern or text that goes along with this. I see it with these graphs, pie graphs. I've seen it with line graphs. I've seen it with, even if you're filling out a form and maybe there's an error on the form and you get that red box around your input. That's not quite enough to let the person know that there is an issue. So you need to make sure that there's an X next to it or that it says error or warning. Next, you want to make sure that your click area is large enough. It should be a minimum of 44 pixels by 44 pixels. And this is especially important on mobile. And I'm sure other people have this issue now. My autocorrect is always wild because I have a little bit of fatter thumbs. So then I kind of just like right away, whatever comes to my head, and then it's just kind of all over the place because the letters are pretty small. If you need to make it at least 44 by 44 pixels so that someone who may have a physical disability or even just someone that's using a mobile phone can accurately get the one that they're looking for. And you need to make sure that your links actually look like links. I know some people hate the underline for links, but there's a reason for it. This falls in line again with the do not show differentiation between color alone. And without that, you may not actually know that that link is a link if you're colorblind. And check that headings are not actually bolded paragraphs. So for those that don't know, screen readers can actually navigate an entire site by heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, by links, by images, by lists. They can scan the page extremely easily, similar to how we would visually. But if those paragraphs are just bolded instead of using the correct heading, it's going to be very difficult for them to scan the page. I showed you that example on the Wave where you could turn the styles off, and that's a great representation of what the screen reader is actually looking at. Just remember that hierarchy is important, and this actually goes for Google Docs, accessible PDFs, and everything else as well. And this one's important for cognitive issues. So is there a lot of movement, blinking, or flashing? In general, if content flashes more than 3 times per second, it's considered unsafe. You could potentially cause a seizure. I would show an example of this, but obviously I'd like to stay away from this as much as possible. And this also goes for parallax, for example. Think about when you scroll on a page and then these things are moving in, up and down and kind of all over the place, and it is slow moving, but if there's too much of it, that can still cause some motion sickness issues and some vertigo there. And we want to make sure that alternative text is meaningful and relevant. The automated tools will flag if you're missing alternative text or if maybe it's too long, but it cannot actually tell if it's meaningful or if it's relevant. You need to make sure you keep it short and succinct. I like to say under 10 words if possible. Obviously, it can be a little bit more, but that's kind of my go-to for how many words I expect. And if you have an infographic or a graph or a chart that you're describing in your alternative text, you should say that this chart is being described in this next element or something of that sort, so you can actually put in the detail that's needed. You should be conveying the content and function of the image within the context of your content. So this is a fun one, because think of you, maybe you're a city website and you have a cute little football team all huddled up. In one page, it could just say football team in a huddle, but maybe it's the football sign up page where you want to put a little bit more context about what we're looking at, like the youth football team in a huddle before their first game or something of that sort. You also want to stay away from words like image of, logo of, because screen readers will actually read the image as like image at design group as like the logo or something, that they'll always say the image first so that the screen reader is warning the screen reader of what they're looking at. And do not fill it with SEO keywords. I see this a lot too. You think that you're actually doing great for your SEO, but if you're having a more accessible website, it's actually going to help you more than just pumping in these keywords like crazy. You want to make sure that links to alternative formats actually include a notice. As mentioned before, if you think about a screen reader navigating a site, they may just want to look at all the links on the page so they can jump quickly. If there's no notice that it's a PDF, and for those that don't know, PDFs aren't very accessible, they may be in for just a terrible experience. So if you include parenthesis PDF and parenthesis in the link text, you're at least warning the user that this may not be a great experience and that they're not staying in HTML. And this could go for anything: PDFs, Excel sheets, Google Slides, Google Docs, anything of that sort. Just make sure you include it in your link text as well. Okay, so now that we have everything up to date, we've kind of run through the tests, we did automated testing, we did keyboard and manual review. We now want to include an accessibility statement. This is something absolutely anyone can write up. There are plenty of statements out there, or even just look at some of your favorite websites and grow some inspiration from there. Some basic info of what it is and why you should have it is because it's usually the first thing lawyers actually tend to look for when coming at a site for ADA compliance. It's your first line of defense. Accessibility statements are recommended to be found on every single website, even if your site is compliant or not. The proper information will give the user someone to connect with to voice a concern, or maybe get alternative formats to the information, rather than jumping straight to legal issues. If you are aware that there are issues with your site, just mark them down there so that someone will actually come to you instead of going elsewhere. This is really important. It should be extremely easy to find, as well as found on every page. I usually recommend putting it in the footer, and I usually see it along with like disclaimers, privacy policies, and things of that sort. The point is that if they're on a page that they know isn't working, they can easily do Command F or like a find on the page and look for accessibility, be able to jump right to that content to be able to voice their concern. And it tells the user important information about the quality of your site, as well as important contact information. It could be that your site is perfectly compliant, but here's the information if you have improvements, or it could be that you know that there are issues, but we would love for you to contact just in case anything is happening. Just wanted to show a quick view. It's actually kind of small now that I'm seeing it on the slides, but you can see in the bottom left corner, it says accessibility as a link in our footer. And that's just an easy way for anyone to kind of jump on real quick and get that information. So now that we know why we need it, what do we actually need to include in this? Well, you want to include the guidelines that your site is following or shooting for. So whether it's WCAG or 508. Warn the user of any major issues found on your site. If you did this quick keyboard test and you realize that, oh shoot, my dropdown doesn't actually work, I can't get to it with the keyboard, make sure it's in your accessibility statement and include maybe an alternative way to access that that's extremely easy. For instance, maybe a sitemap link in your footer while you resolve it all together. You want to include a date or time period when these issues will be resolved. And I don't mean it has to be like super detailed, like this will be resolved by February 27, 2022. You could say that this is going to be, we're currently working on this and it should be resolved by the spring of 2021. You can be a little more vague in that instance, but as long as there is a time period, that is very important. You want to list any preferred technology or browsers to navigate the site. Let's say you created a special experience for someone on Chrome. It might be great to explain that in there, or maybe you forgot to do anything. And now you have limitations that you want to include that in there as well. So if you haven't done any testing with screen readers, it may be worth including that in your statement so that they know that we are working on it, we're going to get the testing done, and so on and so on. And the most important part is we want to include contact information for the user, and it should be email and phone. It's not fair to maybe have a deaf or hard of hearing person have to call you when email is just an easier form of communication, or it maybe you're blind, visually impaired, and email isn't as easy as maybe just picking up the phone to call you. You want to give that information for both. I do recommend not including a form on your accessibility statement if possible, because obviously then you have to worry that that form is accessible, and that's a whole nother thing. But if that's the only way that you have it for now, I think that's fine, as long as you have some form of contact information that's going to be very important. Okay, great. So you've gone through the steps with your automated tools. You did your keyboard testing. You did your manual review. You have your accessibility statement up. You've made changes to your site, or maybe you don't have a developer to work on it, so you just have a backlog of information, but you're still not sure if you're compliant or not, or how much more work you have to do, and that's fine. The next steps for that would be to just reach out to some experts. Once you have your site in a good spot, or you have that backlog, reach out to someone who does accessibility reviews. You need someone well-versed in 508, WCAG, in any form of ADA compliance to get the best out of your site. For instance, Atten does these things. So like we have helped with trainings, worked with clients and in-house developers. We've performed just overall reviews in general. More importantly, coming to Atten, you'll receive an updated stamp of approval from actual users stating that your site is compliant once everything has been implemented, which brings me to my next step. Oh, that's supposed to be number 2. We want to include real users to actually test your site. If you've noticed, there were no screen reader testing information involved in that first part of the review. And that's because only true everyday users who use assistive technology as an extension of themselves should actually be performing these reviews. Experience is absolutely necessary. The way I would use a screen reader would be completely different than someone who uses it every single day. That's why at Atten, we partnered with the Blind Institute of Technology. BIT is a nonprofit organization with a mission of placing people with disabilities in the workforce and equalizing the playing field for everyone through technology. If you missed our lunch presentation on Tuesday about this partnership, be sure to reach out so we can share the recording. We're working together to bring awareness and education to everyone in the digital space. BIT is also helping us perform our user testing for ADA compliance and have been true experts in enhancing our accessibility practice at Atten. So thank you for joining me today. I'm hoping, normally I would love this to be a workshop so we could work together and actually do this review together, but I know it's a little more difficult in this virtual space that we're working with. But if you have any questions at all, I will be here for what's the next like 10 minutes or so till this is over. And if you're at DrupalCon, I can be available at the booth, or if I can share my email again as well if you want to reach out for that. And with that, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and actually turn my video on. You guys can see my face now.
Hey, okay, we have some questions that are coming in.
Awesome.
So one is there a good online tool you would recommend for an accessibility audit / review of particular pages on a site?
Sorry if someone wants to clarify in the chat. Are you referring to like a site improve or like a company that you would go to or level access, or are you just referring to another thing like the Wave tool, for instance?
Well, I guess maybe if we could just, let's start with the free tools. Like what's a good free tool to be using to, I listened to the talk, so I know that the manual testing is ideal. Mm-hmm. But like on the first pass, like a free automated testing tool, what would be the one you would reach for?
I still love recommending Wave just because it is such an easy one to use. Axe is a great one as well. I believe they have an extension that you can add to your Chrome extension as well to get a little bit more information, but Wave is usually my recommended tool.
Right on. And then so what's wrong with Lighthouse? Tell me what's wrong with, I mean, you used Lighthouse earlier.
Yeah, no, Lighthouse is still a great tool. They've changed their algorithm slightly, so they don't necessarily focus 100% on WCAG compliance. It's something that they have, most of it is in there, but they might miss a few things here and there because obviously they are trying to focus on balancing SEO and accessibility and performance and everything together. So I like to use them both because I love the use of the score because it does give you a general idea of like, oh, maybe I do need to do more detail and jump in if I'm at like a 70, you know what I mean? So yeah.
Okay, so just to flip that around, if we're talking about automated tools that we subscribe to or pay for, what would be some of the tools you would use for that?
Site Improve is always a great one, but again, these are all automated tools. If you want a full testing, you would definitely have to go to someone that has that manual review. But regarding the automated side, Site Improve has some great ones. Level Access is just a great company to go to in general for a lot of those things. Those are usually my two big ones, but there's plenty of them out there. But those are two ideal ones. And again, the ones that did Wave, WebAIM in general has some great tools there as well.
All right, awesome. Just if we've got a lot of questions coming in through the Q&A, so
Okay.
we're going to be going through those first. There's some questions coming in through the chat. If you put them in the Q&A, we'll definitely be reading them in order as we go. So I just want to make sure I don't miss any questions that are out there.
Mhm.
Oh, do you have an example of an accessibility statement?
You can go to the @and website and take a look if you'd like. I don't have one off the top of my head right now, but usually we start off saying something that like we are striving to make our site accessible. We are shooting for WCAG 2.1 AA guidelines. Here's a link to that. And then we'll jump in to say like, maybe if there's something wrong, we are aware that there are issues on our site and we are working with a third party to get that relieved and blah, blah, blah. It's like all this stuff and just knowing the contact information and saying that you're always available and always interested in enhancing the experience and always willing to listen and learn.
All right. Well, it sounds like we need a white paper feature on our website with the accessibility statement being the lead gen tool. So thank you for the question. It's giving us great marketing ideas. All right, I've got the next one is, what are some of the most common mistakes you see from an accessibility standpoint on web forms?
On web forms. Okay, so
Yes.
some of the most common issues that I find are some people will want to use maybe like we're working on an accessible version of Chosen.js because you want that beautiful drop down, and we're working with BIT to find alternatives and make that better because unfortunately Chosen is not a great experience for screen readers. So you want to make sure that you can access. Yeah, I know.
2 years. Oh, that's upsetting.
I know. So we're working very hard right now to find the alternative and or create a patch for that. But I would just make sure that you can actually access everything. There's plenty of times when I'll go through and I'll go to do radio buttons and I can't access them because you got rid of the outline. Field sets I see are missing a lot when it comes to radios and checkboxes, and obviously in other forms. Let's see, the errors I think are important. How I said, if you submit a form and there's an error on the page, you want to make sure the user knows where it is and have that tab focus actually go back to the error that's in the page. That way a screen reader or a keyboard user doesn't have to like go searching through the page to find where it is, or a visual user if it's a long page. And the last big one that I see a lot is in relation to missing form labels. If you have an input, it needs to have a form, even or a label. If that label is visually hidden, cool, but it has to be there because that's how a screen reader actually knows what that input is for.
I remember seeing an accessibility expert give a presentation and she recommended that the label not be too far away visually from the element. And I remember specifically, she recommended a keyhole look at the web page.
Yes, Joe, thank you for that reminder. So I like to bring that one up because that's not necessarily an error, but it's definitely a terrible user experience that a lot of people will have maybe a table format for their form and their label is super far left. And then you have tons of space before you get to your input. And if you did that little keyhole thing, you were to look at it, some people actually have that tunnel vision that is very difficult to associate that label with a input that's so far away. So it's always recommended to have the label right above the input just for that easy readability.
Awesome. I just the one piece of accessibility knowledge I know I got from you before. Okay, I've got a question. Presumably an embarrassing question, but it's not. There's no bad questions. Embarrassing question here. But in the past, I was asked to remove alt text or simplify it because a faculty member didn't want it shown in the Google results. I put something like women in glasses holding model of a brain for a professor for a professor's alt text, and that showed in the Google research snippet as text. What is a good way to handle portraits?
So I think it depends. As I mentioned, the context of the page is very important. A lot of times when I see like a staff listing, for example, where it's like an image of the person and be like Michaela Blackham would be the alternative text, and then the next heading on the page is Michaela Blackham. It's very frustrating to hear the same thing over and over again. So for that instance, I like to maybe have blank alternative text. So you still have that alt element or attribute on the image, but because that's there, it will be skipped by the screen reader. However, like I mentioned before, alternative text also comes in along with the search, like you had mentioned in SEO. So you do want to make sure it's short and succinct, but also relevant to what you're working with. So unfortunately, I can't give you a straight answer because it's completely relevant to the context of the page. WebAIM has a really, really great article related to that, and they use George Washington as an example. I always love that one. So I would definitely recommend that. And maybe when we send all these resources out, whenever this webinar is recorded and we're ready to send it out, I can include some of those resources as well.
Yeah, and just a quick note, I've seen a couple of questions come in about are we recording this? Everything's being recorded. If you are here, please sign up for the Atten Sketchbook. We put a link in the chat. Everybody who signed up to get a sketchbook will get a link to all of the recorded videos that we've been putting together this week. So please do that, and you get a sketchbook. All right, the next item we have here is, how do you remember testing accessibility in the design phase before it gets to development?
Yeah, that's great. I actually just did a webinar on this, 2 weeks ago, kind of on like integrating it into every part of your process and with each team. So I don't know what programs you use, but we use, no, we don't have to use Sketch anymore. We use Figma now. I got confused. But there's actually extensions for Figma, Sketch, and Photoshop that you can include that will help with some contrast errors, and you can run those. Some of it requires some manual checks and just making sure, like, don't use vague links. If you're having a lot of learn more links on your page, most likely the title of what you're working with should actually be the link and not learn more. So those are the ones we tend to catch a lot in design. There's also some smaller things. I believe I may actually have a checklist that I could send over to you regarding design in an inaccessible PDF, unfortunately. But we should be able to send that over within the resources as well if you're interested.
Yeah, I think Ken Woodworth, our VP of Design, has a talk about our design process in which he goes through accessibility testing on his team. All right, so we have you played with editorially? It's A11Y. Have you played with this tool at all?
I haven't played with this one. I'm not sure if it's related to content editors or not. I'm hoping someone will put a comment in the chat maybe to clarify. But if it has to do with content editors, we've been recommending the CK Editor automated accessibility testing tool. We just took that over as a Drupal module, but it's been really great for content editors there to be able to double check their work before they publish, which will catch for like, this, it looks like it's a bolded paragraph. Do you want it to be a heading instead? And things of that sort. Okay. Oh, I thought.
Okay. We've got somebody asking about where to go to the sketchbooks. I mean, that's a question for me. I'm gonna read a question for you, and then I'll answer the other question in the chat. So the let's see, what is the best Captcha? So in terms of accessibility, like what tool is the best tool?
Yeah, that's always a great one because unfortunately they're all kind of terrible, but they're also terrible for actual user experience as well, but they're kind of needed, unfortunately. Mike Hess has actually written some stuff about that, so maybe I can find you some information on like his personal preference, but he's mentioned it's not as easy as adding maybe a Captcha or anything of that sort. It's more of like sending it to a different email that then can help spread it out. But honestly, any of the ones that just aren't what's the word? Visual is probably the better one. So I think like the normal robot one that's just like, click this if you're a robot, basically, is usually the best one because a screen reader, it might be annoying, but at least it's easier to use.
Awesome. And I think so. There's a question about a question: is there a build? Is there a there's a which Captcha? It's just a which Captcha were you just talking about?
I can't think of the name of it, but it's usually visually hidden, and or you have the button that just says like click this if you're not a robot or whatever is usually the best one.
Awesome.
Honeypot.
So
I just saw someone write that. Yes, one of those types.
awesome. So we've got if my team wanted to start doing accessibility audits on our own, where would you recommend we would go to get some good training for our in-house staff? Well,
well, obviously, I'm going to say Atten Design Group is a great spot for some training. Blind Institute of Technology also does some great things. And then there's just plenty of meetups out there if anyone's interested in going. The Boulder one, or if you're in the Denver area anyway, the Boulder one is really fantastic. A lot of the people there actually work at like CU Boulder, for example, and they're very good when it comes to digital accessibility. And then WebAIM had a good training program. And then you can get some certifications through IAAP, which is pretty cool. But any meetup group in DC, I just saw that come through. Not too sure because I am Denver based, but I'm sure there is. I would not be surprised if there is an accessibility meetup there.
Yeah. All right. So there's a question about a plugin of some sort to check let's see. Is there a built-in plugin of some sort of or some sort of checker to include on the edit site that checks before you publish a page? I think you had a blog post recently about CK Editor, and I think the questioner may have seen that blog post asking, is there anything that's checking the other fields that are associated with the form?
That's true. I don't know any off of the top of my head that's there. And that's mostly because if you're using the CK editor, it's most likely that you're a content editor of some sort and you have a little bit more flexibility regarding structure, alternative text, bolding, italics, things of that sort. Regarding the other fields, it's usually something, how the theming is done is how it's portraying it. So that, unfortunately, that would be a front end thing. I know Drupal itself has some checks and balances there when it comes to like alternative text, which is good. But that's about it, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, with respect to just, I mean, from a very high level, Michaela, keep me honest here. You're the expert.
That's what editorially is for. I'm writing that one down. I don't know that one, but I'm interested. So thank you.
My understanding is that, you know, sometimes accessibility issues are introduced by content editors who are empowered by the authoring experience to make bad choices. And so one of the things that you want to do in the authoring experience is not let them make bad choices.
Exactly. Yeah. One of my sessions that I always talk about is like the developers should be setting the content editor up for success. And that's kind of where it is. But I do like the editorially. I'm going to definitely take a look at that one. So thank you. I think it says John.
And then I'm just posting a link to the accessibility CK editor accessibility checker plugin for that. Okay, well, we are almost at the top of the hour, so I think this might be a good place for us to break. I know there's some more questions here. We'll be answering them as we go, as we respond to the videos. Please, if you have not already signed up for the Atten Sketchbook, please do so. If you have the links to the sign up form are in the chat. The chat button's at the bottom of the window. Michaela, thank you so much for doing this. This is fantastic. Thank you all for joining us. We had a lot of folks join us, and a lot of people stayed the entire time. So it was really, really fantastic. We're going to be back in 3 minutes to talk about development with Pantheon upstreams. If anybody here is interested in joining that, a link to that is also in the chat. I'm going to leave this Zoom open for a couple of minutes so people can catch up with the back scroll in the chat. But we're going to sign off now. Thank you so much, Michaela.
Yeah, of course. I also put my email in the chat. So if anyone needs to reach out, I am obviously available. So